You Write It? The podcast where we dive into the minds of storytellers to discover what it really takes to create the stories on screen that we love. I talk to producers, screenwriters, directors, actors to get into their creative process. On How Would You Write It, it's all about the stories behind the story. So, if you're curious about the art or craft of storytelling, you're in the right place. Let's get started. I would like to introduce my guest, who I'm so just very pleased to have here today, Spade Robinson. Spade Robinson is a story consultant who works with filmmakers and screenwriters to help take their career from a hobby into a working career in the industry. Welcome so much, Spade. I would just
Hi.
again just hi. I just want to thank you so much for taking this time out to even come on. How would you write it? Because I feel that your skills that and services that you provide our creative community is so needed. So I just, thank you so much for taking the time to come out and sit with me and give our community some tips of the trade. Tell them all about who you are and the services that you and your group provide. I am just so thrilled to have you here. So let's just kind of dive into it. Would you like to
Amazing. Awesome. Thanks for
tell
having me.
yeah, would you like to just tell the group or the audience, a little bit more about what you do and who you are?
Absolutely. So, first and foremost, I'm an artist, and that's what I think sets me up the most for working with artists. When I first started directing and went to film school, what gave me a leg up in that is that I was a theater major in undergrad and can come at directing from the actor's perspective. And the same thing is true when it comes to consulting and helping screenwriters and filmmakers get to the most compelling version of their story, because I'm also a writer, I'm also a director, and I also work with for-profit and nonprofit companies and organizations that select writers. So working with the Fox Diversity Initiative or Sundance Institute or any of these institutions that either hire or bring in writers to their program to move their careers forward. I know what they're looking for because I'm on that side, helping them choose who they're going to have in their cohort or their fellowships or labs. So that helps me to just be really honest about what's working, what's going to move you forward, and what's not.
Oh, that is cool. I know so many writers who have, applied and or have been accepted into those fellowships. So that's wonderful to know. And just like she stated that she has worked with Fox, she's worked with what is it, 20th Century, HBO, Sundance. I feel like I'm missing a couple that I saw
Disney,
that you
Film Independent.
yes.
Um, yeah, so on the studio side, there's usually a program that they're bringing in, whether it's diversity or emerging writers and stuff like that. But on the nonprofit side, with Film Independent and Sundance, it's not about bringing you on to a job per se, but sort of that cultivation and curation work going into a film festival or making the work as good as it can be to be more open to those opportunities.
Wow, that is just wonderful to hear and to hear that your experience. So, what drew you into? I understand your history is directing and screenwriting yourself and writing yourself, but what drew you into wanting to provide that support on being a story consultant and helping writers and filmmakers get their product or their creativity to that final finish line?
It really comes from having the best bosses in the world. When I first graduated from film school, my first job was an internship in development at 34th Street Films, which was Tyler Perry's production company in LA. So there was TPS, but 34th Street Films was a production company whose mission was to expand his brand from beyond what we know it today. And so the executives that worked there had me reading scripts, analyzing scripts, doing coverage and things like that. And I really cut my teeth on development that way. And then I went into several development jobs as an assistant and then a coordinator after that. And having bosses who encouraged me, saying, "Oh, wow, you really have an eye for story. Let me push you in this direction," was really helpful. And um, ultimately, I decided not to go down the executive track and continue to move up to being a creative executive and all of that, because my heart still was in being an artist. But once I left Sundance, I was, reviewing people's screenplays just as friends and giving them feedback, just helping them out. And that's when I decided to turn it into a business.
Hmm. So when you decided to turn it into a business, like, oh, the the scare of starting your own business in this industry, what steps did you make? Like, for anyone who's looking to kind of follow your footsteps, like, what steps did you make? Was it about networking? Was it the funding for that? Like, can you give a little bit of details of the steps of how you walked into that career?
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to do that really attracted me to this was something I could use my brain to do, something that had like a low overhead. I come from a family of serial entrepreneurs, and I knew I didn't want like big startup costs. So like, how can I use my brain and that be the product? And then beyond that, I particularly at that time, I was in a humbling situation where I wasn't working. I quit my job to work on a documentary that was taking forever. And I had to reach back out, reach out to my contacts in certain places and say, are you guys looking for a screener? Are you guys looking for a reader for this? And that's really where I got started. And a lot of those institutions have yearly cycles. So you know how you apply to Nichols every year, you know how you, um, because they have yearly cycles, when it's time to come back around, they'll pick up the phone and say, hey, do you have the capacity to do that again this year?
Mhm.
So, in those ways, I've been able to continue to do those jobs every year and to, grow them into higher positions or working with different companies because of word of mouth. And word of mouth is, it's so incredible and it works when you work it. So I've noticed that people tend to know in the industry tend to know who I am and know what I can do. And I'll get an email saying, oh, I got your information from such and such person, and I'm from this organization. Would you be willing to read for us this year or something like that? And growing up, my father always used to say, a great reputation is more important than anything. And so I think that's what I strive for, to do a great job. I try to over deliver with all of my clients, um, and give you everything that's in my brain. If I read your script, I'm obsessed with you as a writer. I'm obsessed with your script, and we're working together to get it to the best version. And I think that's how, for a long time, I mean, before I got on TikTok, I didn't have any promotion at all. And the only way I was able to work was just people recommending me to their friends.
And word of mouth is important. So in this community, it's a small community, and then everybody thinks it's huge, but it's a small community of people, and it's who kind of a little bit. It is luck. Don't get it's luck, is hard sweat and work, and is keeping going at it, but it's also who you know too, because your name in this field is a very is very important to kind of set those relationships up with people who believe in you. Like, they keep calling you every year, they trust you, they know that you're dependable. So that's a good thing for all of us to know, in this industry, well, any in heck in life too, in the regular. I wanted to ask you, since you um are a story consultant, you do story consulting also, what elements in a script that you see, let's just say you get a script and you're like, this is good, this is good, it may need this and this little tweak here, but this is good. But are there particular elements or factors in a script that make you go, this person is on it, they may just need a little tweak here? Because I don't think everything's ever perfect in any way. It's something that always needs can be better. So what do you see, when what are you looking for when you're doing story consulting on a script?
Two main things I would say is voice and structure.
Mhm.
And they may not seem like they're closely related, because structure is kind of the vegetables of it all, and voice is kind of like, I don't know, ice cream and cake, right? But someone who knows structure well enough, and that's what storytelling is. Storytelling is, um, I have put events in a certain order.
Mhm.
And the order I decide to put these events in, that's my storytelling, right? That's how I drew the story.
Mhm.
Um, so someone who knows how to tell a story well, which is to say they know what order to put these events in, that builds structure.
Mhm.
And that to me is automatically a strong writer. And then the writer's voice. When the writer's voice is distinctive,
Mhm.
um, it's unmistakably that person who wrote it and nobody else could write it because the voice of the script is so distinctive. I think that's what makes it stand out.
So, as a story consultant, when you're doing that, what services or level of help can you provide a filmmaker and or a screenwriter?
Yeah, so I have everything all the way from like just you want to hop on the phone and it's an hour of brainstorming, whether it's career brainstorming or we need to brainstorm on a script. You're not even at the outline stage yet. You're trying to figure out if this is a valuable story. From that all the way up until with the documentary, I will watch your rough cut and give notes, or your screenplay. I'll read your screenplay, whether that's a television pilot or a feature, and then give notes from that. And usually people will get either notes or notes in a consultation, which is just live with me going over what's working, what's not working, and the step forward. And usually I give homework. And I know homework can be a dirty word, but there has to be some kind of um, compass forward, right? So if I say, okay, your second act isn't working, here's why it's not working.
Mhm.
That's like half of what you need to know. The other half of what you need to know is what development work is going to get you there. And it's not always one to one. It's not always your second act isn't working, so then restructure your second act. It could be your second act isn't working because you didn't plant the character well enough. So now we need to go back into character development, and that's your homework. A
Mhm.
lot of times, what I'm telling my client is you don't need to go to the page right now, right? So I'll get a script, I'll read it, and someone may be ready to jump back onto the page and get back to writing.
Uh-huh.
But if there's like deep development work that needs to be done, it's like therapy, right?
Mhm.
Um, your therapist is not going to say, I think you need to date 100 people. Your therapist is going to say, let's figure out why you haven't forgiven your mother. And then, and oftentimes sessions with me end up becoming that, right?
Mhm.
Like it'll end up becoming, okay, so let's talk about the fact that your grandmother never told you you were adopted. Because that's what the script is really about.
Mhm.
Like everybody is writing about themselves, either a character like themselves or still trying to understand something about the world through their script. And
Uh-huh.
if you and I are working together and we're not talking about that, then we're not talking about the script.
Yeah.
I can't help you with structure when your brother who abandoned you is the only person you're thinking about. Let's talk about that first.
Yeah.
And let's get to a place of forgiveness so you can write him well in the script with some dimension, because that's why he doesn't have any dimension. He's just the villain with no dimension. But so we have to address what's happening on the inside of you.
Mm.
And then we go to the page and write the character better.
Oh my gosh. So, folks, I highly recommend Spade Robinson to help you because you're gonna get a little bit, it's a little very small smidgen, if needed, a little bit of therapy. So I love it. Um,
It.
Spade, talk about your website where they can find your services. It's called the Atlanta Film Project, correct?
Yes. So atlantafilmproject.com. And when you go there, you'll be able to see where you can book a session one-on-one. If I'm having a lab, like a residential lab, we haven't hosted one since before the pandemic, but I'm putting together one now where, we rent a big house and it is like, it is like a lab where
Mhm.
there's programming, we watch films, we go over your script, there's workshops, and then there's time depending on the location of the place where you can be out on the property,
Mhm.
thinking, journaling, going over your notes and stuff like that. And I also want to start traveling. So we're planning a lab in South Africa. Um, it's just, I think it's really important. And I learned this from working at Sundance and being at the Sundance Labs. It's really important to take people out of their everyday environment
Mhm.
to get them to a place where they can really clearly think about things. Because if the baby is crying and your spouse needs dinner and your boss is trying to figure out where you are and your sister who gossips a lot just told your business, like it's very hard to focus on your script in the middle of all of that.
Mhm.
And so getting you out to the country or the mountains or wherever we end up being, so you can be surrounded by beauty, be surrounded by people who think like you, and
Mhm.
focus on the story is usually really helpful. So we don't have a lab on the site now, but as we continue to plan, that's where you'll be able to find labs. You'll be able to find my screenwriting workbook, Script from Scratch, which is exactly what it means. How do I take a script from scratch and then make it a script?
Mhm.
Um, and book a one-on-one session with me. And then you can also find my podcast. It's called
I was just
Storyteller
going to say you have some
Therapy.
podcasts on there too. Yes.
I do, yeah. It's called Storyteller Therapy. And I try to address the part of growing in the industry that a lot of people don't talk about, because transparency is like one of my life missions, being transparent about what this is really like. So there are episodes on there about the nuts and bolts, writing a script, doing an outline, stuff like that. But there's also episodes about, how to maintain your life and your emotions before you make it, and how to build relationships with people in the industry. What are the actual steps? I wish somebody would tell me, because that was so frustrating with me coming up in this industry, is nobody would tell me how to do it. People would say, "Oh, you should be making movies if you're an artist." Right, but how? Like, how do I get funding? How do I create context? I don't know how. And so I try to be really transparent. If I know it, you know it. That's how we're going to break past some of those barriers, like racism, sexism, all the isms
The
in
isms.
the
Yeah.
film industry. We break down those barriers when more of us have access to the information.
Yes. And this is the reason, everyone, I wanted her on this podcast, because following her on TikTok, and that's where I met her on, as TikTok, to be very honest, in seeing her just being very open about this industry and providing resources and tips and knowledge, um, was just so, to me, I was like, okay, I haven't seen anyone who look like me doing what she's doing, and I just have to talk to her. So this is the reason why she's here. And I'm sure her the Atlanta Film Project and her services is open to everyone. And that's who she is as a person, and that's who she is as a business owner. And as someone who's willing to, open up give her knowledge to the masses of creatives like me, who are asking the same questions. Well, how do you do that? How do you do that? And so here's a person who truly has that information, who's willing to work with you to give you that. Now, with the Atlanta Film Project, you also spoke about your book. So, and I know you can find it on Amazon, and then you
Yeah.
can also get it from your website. But can you tell us a little bit about what's all in your book?
Yes. So it's called Script from Scratch. This is it right here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's on Amazon, or you can get the downloadable version on my website.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I go through like the downloadable version and how to use it. There's the first pages about how to use it so that you can use it for the rest of your career. You can just save it and use it over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very analog. Like I have to like write it on paper. So, this is my version of it.
Me too.
And yes, right. Because I don't, something about writing notes, like it's something about it. So I wrote this book a long time ago and I rewrote it before I published it more recently. And it's a step-by-step workbook for developing a feature screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is like step by step. So when you first open the book, the very first thing you do is a word vomit. And I mean that, just like, ugh, like I want to know everything you want to say in your script. Just tell me like everything you can think of about your idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly we organize that into a script, right? And so every day has a day one. So it's how many? It's 4 weeks, and it's 4 weeks of development work.
Oh, wow.
So once you put it out there, you do your word vomit, then I have you do a story statement. I talk about story statements on my TikTok, but it's a sentence that every single story asks. And so once you have your story into that story statement, then you can move forward and develop it into an outline. And so we sort of slowly do that until you get to the final outline. And once you finish the book, you've automatically finished your final outline, and then you can go to pages. And what I like about this program, Script from Scratch, is that you're doing development work along the way. So as you're writing your outline, I'm asking you questions about your character's backstory. I'm asking you questions about their relationship. I'm making you write dialogue, right? You're not to the script yet, but you're doing all of that along the way so that you don't have to spend like 12 weeks, like going through the development, then going through the outline, then, sweetening the outline, and then getting to the script. And then you get to the script and it's not good, then you have to go all the way back and do development work. Let's just truncate that and do it simultaneously. And I do it in a way where you're not really thinking you're doing development work. I just ask you a random question over here. So you're going through your outline, you're like, okay, I have my second act. I know what happens in my second act. Then I'll ask you about the character's grandpa, and you're like, uh, but because you now have all of this knowledge because of all these questions I asked you during the process, when you get to the end, you're like, yeah, I know everything about the story. I know everything about this character. It eliminates writer's block because you've made every creative decision. That's what writer's block is. Writer's block is fear, staring at a blank page and not knowing if you're going to say the right thing, or that it's going to be interesting, or that it's going to be funny. I don't know. So you're stuck. But after you've done all of the creative work and you've made every single decision,
Mhm.
you can easily just go to the page and it just comes out of you.
So if you are struggling, hey, I ordered the book and I've got probably 15 scripts under my belt, but I ordered this book. Okay. Because in my mind, I'm like, it's certain scripts that I have started, installed on because I haven't figured out to move rest. I know the story, but to move on the rest of the story, there is a block there. So
Mhm.
I ordered the book.
Have
So
to tell me about it. Please,
oh
please
yeah,
send me an email once you get it.
it's two rom-coms, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm a rom-com writer, that I've been working on, and I've stalled on two of these scripts because they're rom-coms. But I brought your book for just that purpose alone, from listening and going to your website and hearing about it and looking at the pages. So I'm really excited about them and excited to get them and work on them and hopefully work with you in the future. But because I'm so excited about you and so very I just know that your voice is needed more in this community than ever. But my next question to you is with the pandemic, with all of the we had the writer strike, we had all the writer strike, the actor strikes and all that. Then, we're having a change in administration from the United States. Um, some of the hope, because it seems like the industry never, it appears from just from slightly being outside of the industry, it appears that the pickup on new IP is not as prevalent as it used to be. And there's a lot of people taking it in their own hands to go and film their own things, which is a great thing. Being an independent filmmaker is I feel is one of the wonderful things to do. But I also am hearing places like YouTube now, is going to be a place where if you got a film or you got a show, YouTube may be the place where you may need to land, because they're not. There's no one at the door saying you can't get in, with YouTube, from my understanding, from what I've heard. But what have you heard, or what advice can you give writers and our filmmakers who have not are seeing all the craziness happening in the industry, are seeing the stall out in the industry? Um, do you have any kind of ideas or advice that you can give us who are just trying to see what's next and what should we do?
Whew, okay. I think the flat truth is that I don't think the industry is going to go back to where it was.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know, but I don't see that happening. I think it's a shift that I remember when I was in film school. This was 2008, 9. And there was a writer's strike, WGA strike during that time.
Mhm.
But I was in film school, so it didn't affect me until I graduated. But I remember everyone around LA was talking about like how different it is after that strike. I think it's one of those things where, okay, so if you If you've taken any of my classes or you listen to my TikTok, you know I compare everything to relationships, literally everything.
Mhm.
Um, so it's kind of like you're in a relationship and somebody cheated. You may stay together, but it's never gonna go back to what it was, right? So I think it's similar to that where there has been a level of distrust in terms of what we consider our labor to be worth
Mhm.
and understanding how capitalist driven our industry is in terms of certain organizations and powers that be.
Mhm.
Um, this is a capitalist country. And I'm not necessarily anti-capitalism, like I think every system works if you work it, and human beings are involved in every system, so they human all over it. Um, so that is to say, I don't know that I personally realized how capitalist, whatever wave we're in.
Mhm.
Because just being in the industry so many of the artists really very much still understand this as an art form and care very much about the art form.
Mhm.
Um, and that doesn't mean that there isn't commerce. Commerce provides the ability to keep doing the art form. But when commerce does not consider the art form at all, then
Mhm.
it's not the film industry. It's just like tech and money. Um, okay, so why am I saying that? I'm saying that because I think we've reached a threshold where there is a level of distrust. I think we've reached a threshold where the amount of risks that people are willing to take um, has shifted. Now, based on conversations I've had just this week, and
Mhm.
it's only Wednesday, um, Americans are going overseas to get movies made. I became, oh gosh, this was 2018, 17, 18. First year I went to Berlinale, the European film market at Berlinale. And I was blown, and I had been in the industry since like 2011. I was blown away because I was like, this is, I had been to a film market. I worked for Sundance. Of course, I've been to a film market. That's a market. But it's the biggest market in the world. And everybody is there. Every country is there. All the companies are there. The
Wow,
level of
my first time
buying
in
and
America.
selling. Oh, I mean, so we have our own in America, AFM. It happened in Vegas this year.
Yeah, I hear
Uh,
that.
but it's so impressive because you get to see how big the world is and how much business is being done all the
Mm.
time. That's helpful because every country does not have the film industry. I mean, every country has the film industry. Every country does not have the studio system.
Mhm.
So it didn't hit me until I was at EFM this year. And I was standing in line. I was standing in line so there's a big market and all these distribution and production companies have hotel rooms. So
Mhm.
you go to the hotel and you either have a meeting that you set up ahead of time or you can just like wait and be like, oh, that's a distributor I want to talk to. I'll just go in and say, hey, do you have time on your schedule to talk to me? And so the access is very different from what we have in the US. Because
Mhm.
you don't just in the US, just walk up to a distributor and say, hey.
Mhm.
So I was outside of a distributor's hotel room waiting to talk to them.
Mhm.
And there was this producer from New Zealand. And I was talking to her about all the differences in the film industry, all this going on, complaining, blah, 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 blah. She's like, oh, yeah. And then she was like, oh, you're American. She's like, that's right. You have the studio system. First time I realized the rest of the world doesn't have the studio system. So
Mhm.
the level of gatekeeping, like talking to a producer in Europe and getting a deal made is so different because, okay, I'll say it like this. So how does the studio system work? The studio system works
Gatekeepers.
because they promote stars,
Mhm.
right? Like that's the marketing.
Mhm.
So we have a certain amount of stars, right? That can
Mhm.
bank this amount of money, or we can predict that they're going to be there. Any movie there and is going to bring back that amount of money. Okay.
Mhm.
And then when Americans decide to go to the movies, they decide because they want to see the new blank film. They don't go see the new blank director's name or the new blank Fox or the new studio name, the new actor's name,
Yeah.
right? So, and it wasn't always like this, but because of that, the studio promotes stars. Okay, so because the studio promotes stars, that's the selling point, and that's where the revenue come from. That's like the cycle of revenue.
Mhm.
Um, and so you're able to gatekeep because things are funded based on attaching a star, which are hard to get to because there's only certain many. And then even access to like pitch a project goes through usually the agency, which also represents stars. So something being packaged and made and going out into the world is really wrapped up in this cycle, in this system that is the studio system, right? If you're in a country that does not have the studio system, meaning producers are just producers, whether they work for a company or independently, they don't need the same level of like bankability for stars to be attached.
Mhm.
So they have a completely different system in how movies are made, and it's a lot more accessible. And Europeans go to the movies for a different reason. So let's say on a Friday night, they'll go to the cinema, look up at the theater and say, oh, or read the pamphlet, like, oh, this sounds like a good story. I'll see this movie. Americans do not go to the movies because it sounds like a good story. They go to the movies because they saw the trailer and such is in it.
Mhm.
So if you have a good story, your film can do well in different places. Whereas you have a good story here, you could just flop because of so many other factors, marketing, stars, how many theaters you can get, the system, right? Okay, so why is that important? Because it's helpful for filmmakers to know that it's a big world out there and you don't have to work within the studio system to make a film. Independent filmmakers know that, but they also feel as though that's the ultimate goal
Mhm.
because that's like access to bigger budgets and like different level of talent.
Mhm.
Well, when you do co-productions with countries that are not a part of the studio system, getting access to that funding is different. A lot of countries have state funding, meaning their government supplements the production budgets. We don't have that in America. And I've known about that for a long time working in documentary because I was a funder and
Uh-huh.
I would see how the budget, the pie, is made up of different funders. And if you're from Sweden, right, the Swedish government, if you apply for film funding,
Mhm.
will pay partially, potentially a big portion of your budget. And then, of course, there's reporting to the government or whatever. But there's so many more systems. And I guess my advice, I'm explaining it because I don't want to say my advice is to just do your research, understand the business, and then make decisions accordingly without giving you the context. So I'm sorry if I talked for a long time, but hopefully that gives you an understanding of how you can operate within the film marketplace as an artist and think of yourself more entrepreneurially than just relying on what's available to you by way of a system that is shifting in a way that we don't know where it's going to land.
No idea. No idea where it's gonna land. Can on that subject of capitalism, what is your thoughts about the AI situation where a lot of companies or film agencies or however you want to call them, production companies are trying to basically parse out the work of a screenwriter to a AI system, and even in animation, I believe, or graphics, or however you want to call it, CGI, they're trying to push humans out and use AI as their source.
Okay, so I'm going to compare this to a relationship.
You can go ahead. I'm loving it.
Okay.
You're making it common sense. You're bringing it down so people can understand it. So I appreciate that.
Okay, so I think of the AI situation like dating.
Mhm.
Um, I have no control, zero control, no percent control,
Mhm.
whether somebody likes me or not.
Mhm.
I have all the control over who I date and whether I like somebody myself. Okay, how does that relate to AI? Capitalism is going to capitalize and AI is going to AI.
You mean
And my question for you as an artist is, how are you capitalizing?
off of AI?
And how are you AI?
Mhm.
Because as much as you can say said production company, studio, whoever is catching a break and doing it more cheaply, do you know what that means? That you could be catching a break and doing it more cheaply. You don't have no control over whoever decides to take advantage of you, but you can decide whether you're going to let yourself be taken advantage of. So if you decide that, oh, the writer's room for this show is, going to be truncated and they want us to break the episodes and then they're going to use AI to finish them. Well, then why are you breaking the episodes and throwing yourself under the bus? Why don't you, since you have the talent and the skill and executives don't know how to break an episode, why don't you develop your show and use AI to then finish the rest of your episodes?
Mhm.
And I know all of that can be easier said than done. And there's some intricacies that I'm probably not understanding or explaining. But I only see myself as a beneficiary from certain things because my mother used to say this all the time. There's a difference between what's true and truth.
Ooh.
And I'd rather believe the truth. So, what is true, if we take it back to dating, what is true is that this man does not like me. And what is true is that this other man does not like me.
Mhm.
And what is true is that maybe I haven't had a committed relationship in, I don't know, what's a long time? What would be a
10
long time
years.
for people? 10,
5 years. Shoot, 5 years.
5 years. Okay, 5 years ago, 5 years, right? All those are factual things.
Mhm.
But the truth, the God-given truth is that I am fearfully and wonderfully made and
Hey,
that I am valuable beyond measure
yes.
and that what is for me is for me. So I'm not taking the statistics or the data or any all those things are true. True. Great. We can all agree those things are true. But the truth is that I have all of the power to utilize technology and then take advantage of the system my way.
Mhm.
Um, and not be railroaded by this technology, particularly because I don't have control over what people are going to do with it.
Mhm.
So I'm going to do my best of my ability to learn it and then bend it to my will.
Ooh, that's such good advice. I love it. I love it. Thank you for that. I think I probably just got a couple more questions for you. And I definitely want you to come back if you ever feel like it again and give some more
Yeah.
of your insights to the audience who's watching, are the people who are looking at are still calling themselves aspiring writers, even though they have bled over the page already. But I want to go back to um, writing as the craft and of being a creative. Um, with what you just said, and I hope everybody got the answer that what you just said, that there are ways and other ways to go about what we're not seeing here in America. There are other ways and options to make it happen. That was what I heard from you. And so don't just pigeonhole yourself here, but within that, if you see if someone wants to come to you and be like, listen, I just I, I'm depressed about everything that's happening here. And I just don't know in even more layman's terms. I just don't know what to do. And I know I'm a good screenwriter. You read their stuff and you're like, yeah, you're a good screenwriter. What would be the first step that you would tell them to do in today's what's happening in today's society in with what's happening in the industry? What would be the first maybe 2 or 3 steps you would tell them to do?
The first step is to grieve the career that you thought you were going to have. And I'm not saying that you're not going to get there, But once you grieve, finally grieve, feel it,
Mhm.
let it go,
Mhm.
then you don't no longer feel attached to doing things in a systematic way to get you the fame or fortune or recognition that you thought was coming for operating at the studio level,
Mhm.
right? Once you grieve that, I would say research the market
Mhm.
and get a good sense of where you may fit in. And then I would say double down on your voice because you did the research. You have an idea of where your voice fits in the market and how you can become profitable. Like, okay, I thought I was going to be able to do this, but I don't know, the novel to screenplay pipeline might be better because I have connections here, right? I've researched the market. I've looked at my contact list and what I can make happen, and I decided to go in that direction. And then once you do that and you double down on your voice, you make sure it's like
Mhm.
perfect, right? The work is solid.
Mhm.
The work is solid because that's the hardest part.
Mhm.
That's the part we're usually in most denial about.
Mhm.
So once the work is solid, then you swallow your pride and hit the pavement, reaching out to people.
Love it. Okay. So, and then I just want to just roll back, and I feel like I should ask this first because of the story consultant, because you just dropped so many gems. And I feel like this question is bland, but I also feel like for some people, I have been talking about with other creators is taking feedback,
Mm,
um, and how as a creative, the response of the feedback that you've received, and how. So I guess my question to you would be when you receive when you give feedback to a creative in any way, filmmaker or a writer, and it's poorly received. It's poorly
okay.
um what is your kind of like, okay, as a script consultant, how do you mitigate that? How do you manage that?
Um, I think this happened to me more on the doc side.
Mhm.
Um, with me giving notes on a documentary and people getting upset. I think that only happens when you don't know where your story is. Because when you know your story, what your story is, it's very clear what notes are for you and what notes are not for you.
Mhm.
I I go in giving notes, not wanting to make the script what I want it to be. So I'm not making suggestions. Maybe you should do this. Maybe I don't give like those kind of solutions. Like if he died in the first act instead of the third act, that's not helpful. That's kind of giving you the band-aid or the answer. What I would rather say is that this is an independent screenplay and I want to help you tell the most compelling version of your story.
Mhm.
So the first few minutes of my consultations are like, what is it that you really want to say? What is it that you're trying to say? And then I can tell you A, whether you're saying that, or B, whether you're not saying that. And then C, whether you're saying that well. So if you get notes
Mhm.
and you feel frazzled,
Mhm.
it's usually because somebody gave you a note that feels like impossible to achieve. Like, how would I do that? And so that turns to frustration.
Mhm.
Or if you feel like I don't get it. But if I don't get it, it's because you didn't write it, right? A script is okay. So I'm gonna take a step back. I
That
hope this
was
is
perfect.
boring.
That was perfect. I love that.
So I'm gonna take a script back. So I think a lot of people think of a script as a final art form. It is
Mhm.
not.
It is not.
A screenplay is a map to a production to then an edit to something that ends up on screen.
Mhm.
Because a screenplay is a map, the main job is for it to be clear. Yes, it could be funny. Yes, it could be compelling. Yes, it could be heartwarming, all of those things. But that's not the main job. The
Mhm.
main job is for it to be a readable map that then production can take and be like, oh, I could take this map and then take it to set. And everybody on the set knows what to do because we have the same map.
Mhm.
And then you take those raw ingredients, which is what's in the can, your dailies or whatever, and then you give that to an editor. And the editor also has a script. And based on the map, the editor will edit to this story and add his or her razzle dazzle, which ends up on screen.
Mhm.
So because the main point is clarity, if I don't get it, it may not be clear thematically, right? Or narratively or emotionally.
Mhm.
And that's not like it just doesn't mean anything about you. It just means that I don't have the right ingredients for this to be clear. So in terms of trying to mitigate that, I usually mitigate that by starting off telling people this is independent work and I want to tell the story you want to tell. So tell me what you want to say and let's compare that to what's actually on the page. Because so many scripts live in writers' heads for so long,
Yeah.
there's an assumption that what's on the page is what's in your head, but you didn't put it on the page. It's just prior knowledge because you know it. So I'll be reading something and you'll be explaining an argument between two people. And I'm like, I don't understand why she's so mad. And then you're like, oh, because he killed her dog. Well, that's not on the page. So this doesn't make emotional sense, right? So before you pay it off, you have to plant it. And
Mhm.
it's not a bad thing. It happens to all of us because it's already in our head. So we just assume everybody knows, but
Mhm.
everybody does not know. So I think I try to mitigate that by telling people I'm in your corner. Like this is not my story, this is your story.
Mhm.
But I also try as much as I can to educate people on the purpose of notes. The purpose of notes is not to regurgitate back to you that you are great.
Mhm.
So many of us go to get notes because we want to be validated,
Mhm.
like, yes, this is good. And you're like, okay, good, I can keep going.
Mhm.
I don't want those notes.
Mhm.
I personally don't want those notes. I
Mhm.
want the kind of notes that are going to hold me accountable to operating at a high level as a screenwriter.
Mhm.
I want you to bring up the fact that I don't believe that these two people are married. I want you to bring up the fact that you said she knew, but then it shows her finding out on page 72.
Mhm.
But on page 21, it seemed like she knew. I want you to bring up all of that so it can be a clear map to production because that is the point.
Thank you so much, Spade. I love that. I know you do documentaries too. I know you work on documentaries too. Just can you shortly just speak on um the best way to kind of break into that industry of doing documentaries?
Um, I love documentary because just the people in doc are so amazing. Um, I also love doc because you don't need to get greenlit to make a doc. You just pick up your camera and start making it.
Mhm.
Um, which makes it highly accessible to independent filmmakers.
Mhm.
But it also makes for a lot of terrible documentaries because there's no gatekeeper, so nobody can tell you why this is bad. You just made a bad decision after bad decision.
Mhm.
Okay, so the way to get into doc is to pick up a camera and start shooting. The way to make a great documentary is to outline your documentary. Um, to be open to change and be flexible because it's real life and you can't control what's going to happen. So you're making a documentary about this dolphin, and then the dolphin gets into another zoo, and you're like, oh crap, what am I going to do? So you have to be flexible in that way because you don't have any control over what happens. And then the next thing for documentary is to know documentary structure. A lot of people think that documentaries don't have the same level of storytelling structure, but they do need them. You know, every documentary has to have a beginning, middle, and end, as opposed to just like about a topic. About a topic is not a documentary. Because a documentary has to have a story, and a story is a beginning, middle, and end. So even if the topic is extremely important, you still have to take that down and say, okay, how am I representing this topic? What's the story I'm telling about it?
Mhm.
Um, and then you have to do as much networking as you have to do on the fiction side because you want to sell that documentary. So, the great thing about doc funding is there are more funding sources because of family foundations that care about certain topics, because of there being grants given out from organizations like Sundance Documentary Fund,
Mhm.
um, San Francisco Film Society gives a documentary fund. And I think if you do a fiction film, it had to be in San Francisco, but for documentary, it could be anywhere. And there's the Southern Documentary Fund. There's quite a few funds for documentary, NEH, that just goes on and on and on.
Mhm.
That all have cycles. And I think chicken and egg, if you're a female identifying filmmaker, they give out grants. I've worked with them over the years and they're fantastic. Um, But once you get your film in the can, say you got all these grants and you made your film, then you still want to sell your film or you want it to be distributed in some way.
Mhm.
So having relationships with people or applying to PBS. So PBS has a development fund that they give a big chunk of money for, and then they also buy documentaries to show on PBS. Then of course the streamers, Netflix, Hulu, those people are not difficult to get in touch with. You can meet them at festivals, you can meet them at panels. Um, and just keep those relationships going. The thing about doc is having a lawyer a lot of times is important, because when you're going through a studio system or a production company with a script, they have their own lawyers in house, so they can tell you, okay, we need to take this out of the script, we need to put this in or whatever. They prepare you for that before you go into production. But because you don't have preparation as an independent filmmaker, you're just picking up your camera and going, then having an attorney to say, oh, we can't use that footage, or to help you understand what's open source or not. And then when it comes to actually doing the deal, right? So a lot of times you can't submit to, let's say, a streamer without representation, an agent or a manager. But if you're not repped, then having a lawyer
Mhm.
could allow you to do that. So that is one thing I would also say for getting your documentary made and out there into the world. Um, a lot of people put documentaries up on social media, on YouTube and stuff like that, um, which is a way to get a lot of people to see it. I would say think long and hard about yourself as an entrepreneur. When you come on the end of a project, you don't want to be exhausted and broke, you know? You want to feel as though your labor yielded you something. And maybe you broke even, maybe you made a little bit of money, maybe um you decided to do a co-production with another country and you guys were able to, do distribution overseas or whatever. I think the most important thing to know is just because you're making a film about something important, as a lot of times documentaries are important, that does not mean that you don't need to get paid. You need to get paid. I'm gonna say that again. You need to get paid. That's what makes you sustainable. That's what gives you the heart to keep going, the money to keep going. You will end up in a situation where you financially and emotionally just cannot do it anymore because you decided that the issue was more important than you making money. Both are important because we need your voice, right? We need you to keep making movies. I can't have you drop out and do something else because you can't afford it, which means when you're looking at finishing your film or your documentary, even before you start your documentary, you need to be thinking about who would be the buyer for this documentary. Is it an HBO type documentary? Is it a PBS type documentary? Like, is it a CNN type documentary? ESPN does documentaries. Is it a sports documentary? Can I pitch it at ESPN? There's a lot of homes for films, and you need to be thinking about the business part before you turn on your camera because you need to get paid.
Well, thank you so much, Spade. I appreciate your time tonight to like talk to me and all the tips that you have given. I'm gonna just put it out there. I hope I can get you back again to talk even more and provide even more knowledge and tips to the creative community. Where can people find you?
So right now I am this is funny because I'm a millennial. But I'm on TikTok. And I make TikToks about storytelling and trying to be as transparent as possible about how to navigate this life. So that's at Atlanta Film Project
Mhm.
on TikTok. And then my website is atlantafilmproject.com. I'm also Atlanta Film Project on Instagram. So everywhere where social media is, please connect with me, ask me questions. I'd love to answer your questions. I think we are stronger together. And I think in a world where we decide to have solidarity with each other, there's nothing that we can't do. If we want to bend technology to our will, we want to bend the industry to our will, I think we have to band together.
And just to add to that, everyone, if no one has said to you today, I believe in you, you can do this, is no one who has the voice like you have the voice. You have this gift, use it. It's no one else who can do what you do. No one else can write the way you can write, film the way you can film, direct the way you can direct, produce the way you can produce the way you can produce. It's only one you, and the voice deserves to hear your voice, hear your see your creativity, and see your gift, and see what you wrote. So get to work, and we'll see you next time on How Would You Write It.